How's it going? Welcome back, my wonderful wise ones, to a fantastic video today because we have finally got another Mafia video game. And it's been quite a while since, I had that kind of connection to interesting characters, good quality writing, a story that felt like I was watching an episode of The Sopranos. And let's be honest, okay, let's just get honest for a second. Mafia 1, it's a good game, and the classic is even better than what they re-released with that remaster, but honestly, the peak of Mafia, in my opinion, was always Mafia 2. That storyline, those characters, the way it just slowly got more and more crazy over time, that was just incredible, and that's the closest we're probably ever going to get to something like The Godfather or Sopranos in video game format.
Gabagool! All this from a slice of gabagool? The gabagool. Gabagool.
What makes Mafia so good is it kind of, turns your expectations on its head for, this type of a game that it looks like, but what it actually plays like is something completely different. It's got that staple AAA quality to it that looks like a massive open world game that you would get from, GTA, but it plays very differently, and it's actually mostly linear stories that you go mission to mission, objective to objective. There are little side things that you can do, like customize your cars and all that kind of jazz, which is nice, but there's no, big side content. There's no, distractions going off in, a random location and doing a side mission or something like that. Apart from Mafia 3, that's where the series took a massive turn. Mafia 3 had some good quality, gameplay when it came to the car racing and just driving around in the city. That was a lot of fun, kind of gathering your army all together, getting and unlocking all of these different weapons, and it had some pretty good DLC, surprisingly, but the structure of Mafia 3 is what made it quite repetitive and boring, because basically you would be doing the same thing over and over again until you could, then finally magically get access to the mob boss in that area, in that district, and then take them out. Even though the moment-to-moment gameplay was good and you felt like a goddamn T-100 Terminator at times, it just wasn't really Mafia. It was a fun open world game, don't get me wrong, but it lost some of the identity that made Mafia so great.
What if the explosion takes us out too?
It won't. We'll barely feel it.
A few moments later.
These assholes ain't gonna know.
What the hell was that?
Today we're going to be looking at Mafia The Old Country, and I'm going to be giving you my Mafia The Old Country review. This is based on all the early access and preview events and all that kind of stuff. But honestly, I'm just happy to be talking about another Mafia game because I absolutely love the series. I kind of think 2 is still the best and nothing comes close to it, but I do enjoy, like I said, the other games. What makes Mafia different compared to, say, open world games like GTA or Far Cry from Ubisoft is it does have some of that AAA slop in there where, it tells you exactly what to do at all times, and if you go off the path, then you will be terminated for actually having a brain, because gamers aren't allowed to think, remember. What sets them apart, I would say, is the quality of writing, the story, the characters. That's what really pulls you into a Mafia game, and that really makes or breaks it. I didn't feel like a strong connection in the third one, but the second one was amazing, and the first one is also very good. And it feels like we're returning to that strong foundation here because all of the characters are interesting, crazy psychopaths. It does have some of that cringe kind of disconnect where, you are playing as absolutely horrible bad people, but just like Arthur Morgan, deep down, you're a good person. Arthur Morgan's a good person, remember, guys.
We've all lived bad lives, Mr. Morgan. We all sin. But I know you.
You don't know me.
So I do hope you enjoy this Mafia The Old Country game review. Like I said, it is all based on the early access and press coverage. Also, I'm going to be checking out tons of new games next month as I go to the Tokyo Game Show, which is the press event access. So please let me know if there's anything in particular, new games coming out this year or next year that you would like me to cover, because that's how I get most of my information for the bulk of each year, as it were. And if you enjoy early access reviews, deep analysis on video games, and yearly reviews, and philosophical content, I blend them all together on this channel to try and create something unique. And in my reviews, I always do positives and negatives. That's how I break it down. I don't give you a score at the end of the video, so you can make up your own mind. This community is all about being a wise one, you know, a community of intelligent gamers, I hope, in which we can analyze and just share different perspectives on topics that we care about, like gaming, and I analyze and discuss real-world philosophies and sometimes tie it into gaming analysis. So if that sounds good to you, subscribe, become a wise one, and think for yourself, and give the video a like. So first things first, let's get straight into the positive, and let's just discuss some of the combat, because gameplay is what we're mostly going to be discussing. I can't speak about all the spoilers, obviously, and only from what I've actually seen so far. So gameplay this time around is much more stealth focused, okay? That is the key takeaway. The AI is, you know, pretty good for the most part. It's not amazing. It's a kind of sniper elite level quality of AI where, you know, they're kind of dumb when it comes to stealthing around, and it's got all the classic stealth gameplay, you know, that you would come to expect, like chucking a bottle, you know, making a noise, distracting the enemies. But what I like about it is there's different levels of approach, and the reason I bring up Sniper Elite is because it does have similar gameplay flow to it in some levels. Like you can tackle it in a stealth approach or a more, you know, just guns blazing approach, which I really like. All of the guns are also period accurate, so it's much more weighty and slow for combat, and that's just a lot of fun for me. I like more slow tactical games. Like the, you know, kill time ratio in this is actually pretty quick, like 1 or 2 shots, which is very refreshing in a third-person cover-based shooter, which usually you're, you know, shooting tons of bullet, you know, spongy enemies. The stealth gameplay, sadly, is very vanilla, copy and pasted. I would like to see new mechanics at this point in gaming and just the evolution of games in general. I think we can do a little bit better than just you know, throwing a rock or whistling to get someone's attention. But overall, yeah, it is much more stealth focused, and the reason why I brought up Sniper Elite earlier is because there are lethal options and non-lethal takedowns. Non-lethal will take more time to, you know, kind of choke them out, but you can go for a lethal approach. So I do like it gives you that option as well. So I just feel like the way that they've done stealth this time around is very well done. For the most part, you know, it's vanilla in the sense that you've done it before, but the way it's done and handled is very nice, very visceral. You have things like throwing knives, so you can kind of, you know, do long range stealth as well. Mafia The Old Country is very interesting because it tackles with you know, interesting period in history that we haven't seen many games deal with before. So all of the weapons are interesting. The way everyone, you know, interacts in society is very interesting, and it's just nice to have a glimpse into this time period. But it's also very brutal because you are going to be mostly using knives and more simple, you know, like one-shot weapons. So that brings me on to my next positive, and that is simply the fact that they've, you know, taken hand-to-hand combat that we saw in previous Mafia games like Mafia 2, for example, and built that system around knife combat. And that's a lot of fun because there are some boss encounters that you have to, you know, tackle with, you know, your custom knife and stuff like that, and just enemies one-to-one. It's quite cool. There's even parries, but it's not a Souls-like, don't worry. But I do like the fact that they've kind of fleshed out that mechanic, and it just makes it feel very, you know, dirty and very, you know, dog-eat-dog, and it really captures the brutal essence of what you're actually doing. Most of the time you're going to be bringing a knife to a gunfight, and let me tell you, it gets dirty. I'm a perfectly sane human being. Thank you very much. The next positive I want to highlight is simply the story character build-up. So, you know, there are times where it's a little bit more morally grey and it looks like you're almost doing a good thing at times. And I like that it gives you different situations where you have to question, the morality of the situation, and it paints a picture of, this character coming from nothing and then slowly, building his way up. I think Mafia 2 did a great job of that as well, but I'd like to see that back here again. You're not just suddenly, straight away, a crazy psychopath. You slowly kind of build up through the ranks, gain everyone's trust, and, things get more and more violent, but it doesn't start like that, and that's just nice to see, that there is some character development here. I would say that the gunplay is very similar to that of Mafia 3. That's the most, comparable one, I would say. But it's more slow, like I said, and that's mostly due to the guns that you're using, but there is much more focus on stealth. At times, it tries to emulate, some kind of Red Dead Redemption 2 gunplay as well, especially on horseback, but it feels much more automated, like, much more of a lock-on system. One thing I've always liked about the Mafia games is there are sometimes options to play the games on, like, realistic difficulty, and there are, difficulty options here, and you can make this into a hardcore, more realistic experience, which I really like, and I've always appreciated the Mafia games for doing that. So now in this Mafia The Old Country review, let's discuss some of the negatives, because Mafia The Old Country isn't all, positives. It does have a few mixed elements, and it has been downgraded slightly from what was originally shown, but honestly, it's not that much of a big deal from what I've actually seen gameplay-wise, so I wouldn't be too concerned about that. But sadly, let's first start off that this is running on the Unreal Engine, and the Unreal Engine, I hate it. I absolutely hate it with a passion. Most gamers hate it with a passion if you have any kind of intelligence, because Unreal Engine sucks, the new one especially, because it's very unoptimized. It always has micro starters no matter your system. If you've got the best goddamn god rig, on planet Earth, or you're working for NASA or something, it doesn't matter. Unreal Engine, it just sucks. It makes all the games as well look quite similar. Luckily, they've done a good job here with the lighting, the texture, so it does actually have its own unique art style. The countryside is beautiful, but a lot of Unreal games kind of have this copy and paste look to them, and I'm not a fan of it, and I'm definitely not a fan of the optimization. So that's the first negative. The next thing is the driving. Okay, this is going to be a positive or a negative depending on who you are, but basically, because this isn't an open world game, there is a, free play option, like in other Mafia games where you can go out and explore the world, but there's not really anything to do in these sections. There are some side things that you can do. There are races, like I said, built into the main missions as well, and all this kind of stuff, but you're not going to randomly come across, an interesting, like random encounter or, side character that needs your help. So in Mafia The Old Country, when you're driving from mission to mission, there's actually an option to skip that. And even in games that do have a lot going on for them, like Red Dead Redemption 2, it can feel like a slog in these giant open worlds. So it's nice to have that option there, but it just shows you that there isn't a lot going on in the open world itself, because it's not an open world game. It simply has that as a backdrop. Also, I find it so cool that we're getting this type of game, but it's not set in the city this time. It's more set in the countryside areas. The next positive for the Mafia The Old Country review, I would say, is it's not trying to be a bloated goddamn, 50-hour plus video game. It's on a shorter scale, which I think is actually quite nice and refreshing. Sometimes I just want to play a good story, have it, done. And a big positive is basically you're not going to be doing the same thing over and over again, and that is a big deal for me, because Mafia 3 really had that problem of rinse and repeat style missions. This time around, yes, of course, you're mostly going to be shooting people or stealthing around, or saving people, kidnap situations, extortion, all of that classic Mafia stuff, but it's not always the same thing over and over again. All the missions are completely random and different because, it's a linear story game. So they handcraft all of these missions, none of this, side bloat that you get in open world games. So that's very refreshing, honestly. And to round off this review, this early access review, I just want to highlight a few negatives that kind of stood out to me from the preview gameplay and all that kind of stuff that I've actually seen hands-on and everything. Basically, the love interest in this game, it didn't really hook me. I don't think that it's really compelling. It's very generic at times. You kind of know what's going to happen, and I'm not going to say anything, but yeah, the love interest just didn't really grab my attention in this game. And in Mafia, it's always had a little bit of that. The only other small negative I think I should highlight is because it is mostly on rails, you know, at times the gameplay is a little bit boring because you know that nothing can happen because it's, you know, only a scripted event. And I know that's kind of stupid, you know, you can't have the best of both worlds, but actually you can. A good game can blend both aspects together. For example, in the missions, it would be nice if they did give you some more choices in how you tackle these missions, because some of them, you know, are of course on rail segments, but some of them do allow for a little bit more choice in, you know, going in guns blazing, like I said, or going in more stealthy. And I would have liked to see more interesting level design in verticality, none of this X-ray bullshit that every AAA modern day game has to have, you know, with smeared yellow shit over everything, or, you know, an obvious objective point. It just would be nice if there was more verticality to it, more like Sniper Elite slash Hitman kind of level design in some of these open-ended sections. But for the most part, I do think it's just a fun kind of roller coaster type story experience, and I would highly recommend that you check out Mafia The Old Country, especially if you love the old games. But of course, some of the gameplay elements do feel a little bit dated compared to, you know, bigger studios like Rockstar, like I said, you know, combat on horseback and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, this is just a fun game and an interesting story. It does have some cliches, but for the most part, you know, it's an interesting story and you'll want to see what happens because the characters actually feel alive for the most part, and that is a big deal for this type of game. So there you go, that is my quick Mafia The Old Country early access review, just looking at this from an early perspective to, you know, give you some context to find out if it's worth your time, if it's worth your money, and if Mafia The Old Country is worth playing, or if it's worth it, because, you know, games these days are very expensive. So I think this is a good time overall. So let me know what you think down below in the comments, my wise ones, and if you're gonna play this game, and I'll be seeing you in the next video. Peace out.